or three can be on at the same time, or else they get funny.
Finish up.
Okay. Jim Risley, CUS.
You're not on, Jim.
I'm not?
Okay, you are, sorry.
Yeah, CUSD number 3. I've kind of prepared a statement here to start with, and I've also, kind of ad-libbed a little bit here. The last 2 subcommittee meetings that we have been extremely productive in going over the recommendations that the PRI had and giving us a certain knowledge base so that we could move on. Having said that, after the second meeting, there was a point of, I wouldn't say stagnation, but we needed to come to some type of way of broadening the focus of what we were doing. So I asked members of the PRI if we could meet sometime, Larry Stoner and myself, and come up with a way of broadening the statements that we want to use as solutions to the aquifer protection. And we started looking at the recommendations that they had, and there were 5 categories with funding, taking care of quality, source, and quantity, and realization of our resources, and communication. Underneath these, there are 18 larger recommendations that they have that, in sense, they said, now you people that have been working the last 2 times know what our recommendations were. You have a working awareness and knowledge that we think you could use to prioritize these 18 Arabic numerals that were underneath those 5 categories. So with that said, knowing full well that there's a diversity of people here that represent different regions around the Muhammad Aquifer or the aquifer, we're going to try to tabulate these recommendations, prioritize them. And if you looked at the instructions, we have 18 of these recommendations, as I said. And we have the full task force names up here. Now, your names aren't necessarily going to be, out there for everybody to view what your vote was. But, and I won't have this up here because this is what we came up with in the meeting that we had last Tuesday. These are the 18 recommendations. You go through, and you are going to drop 8 of these recommendations and prioritize 10 of them, okay? Very difficult to do. I understand that. And you're going to rank your highest priority, your number 1 thing that we should recommend as a solution, as a 10, and go all the way down, 9, 8, 7, 6, all the way to 1. Those now will be tabulated, tallied, and brought over here to give us a sense of what Subcommittee B wants to hand over to the larger task force as a whole. Now, having said that, this isn't an end-all by any means, but it definitely is like the 3rd quarter in a mile race. Hopefully we're getting there. And what we will have time to do before the September 17th meeting, if we need another meeting before that meeting, after this, we don't know, we'll decide after today. And there are other recommendations that have been placed out there from the public, from our task force, and I think we need to do our due diligence and look those over maybe at the end of this process. I talked to Barb about potentially putting that on as another document that we can all review before the next subcommittee meeting or task force meeting. Now, having said that, I'm sure some of you are a little reluctant to say, I've talked to Alex, and your point is well taken, that, hey, I'm a little reluctant now because I went over a lot of this stuff with my constituency, and now we're shifting to this. And if that is a major problem, I would say try to do your very best to rank today what you can. And then, if you feel by our next meeting that there's some adjustments you want to make based on who you might go talk to, we can make those adjustments still. So I'm kind of going on the fly here with that recommendation, but does that make sense as a subcommittee meeting to do that? Okay.
Hey, Jim,
yes,
You mentioned that, and that's kind of, you hit something the point I think I had coming in here this morning, that I realize the time constraints we're under and what we're trying to do here. But for me, when we get this, and then, got it Wednesday, and for me, and I feel I'm a representative of a whole agricultural industry in this state. There's no doubt about that, and I see heads nodding there. So, some things have been thrown together here today. I've got it thrown together, but I'm not gonna wait till the next full subcommittee meeting, but when you represent a whole industry like that, I've got to reach out a little farther in this, because that's, if I sit here and do things individually with Steve Turner, I've failed, because I've got to represent that industry right here. So, I can't stress that enough as we roll this forward here, because I just,
let me ask you this, Steve. From these documents basically made up the larger document that we're looking at. These were the recommendations of 138 that the PRI were able to condense and use to define the other 18. When you talk to your constituency about this document and the recommendations are on this, do you feel like you were given a pretty good sense of where to go with the 18 that we've got it down to now?
Let me say no, but let me paraphrase that, because I'm not trying to there's a lot, what I look at here is trying to look at the overall picture thing, and 18 getting down to 10 is a good start. But, I don't know, maybe I'm a little naive thinking, but I come in here thinking from the very beginning, and I've, like everybody, got educated through this process of maybe, for priority's sake, narrowing it down to 3 or 4, if you're going to go forward with anything, back to the governor and to possibly the state legislature on thing. Now, that's just, my thinking on that, and part of it is dissecting this, and part of it, I'll just be quite frank, is I look at myself sitting here as an individual, as a farmer. I am a good steward of the land and good steward of that aquifer, but just making sure that we can continue being that way without being overregulated, and I think I've been, vocal on that, trying to be looking at the recharge issues from the eastern side to the western side, making sure we don't have unfoot burden on us over there compared to maybe what the eastern side has to face sometimes, okay? So that's what so to answer that, bring it forward, I'm still sorting all that out, okay? I know we're under constraints right here, but I've got an industry I've got to get an answer from here, and I think today, coming over here, Barb, the thing you sent out here, that's one thing I've already had discussions with Illinois Farm Bureau, and maybe we need to draft, like this morning here, an opinion letter on, where our stances are on things, and, after what we got Wednesday, I think, I can go back and work on that, so I'll kind of shut up so somebody else can talk, okay?
No, don't think that at all. They're good comments. Yes.
Donovan Griffith, IMA. Yeah, I just want to echo the comments by Steve and Alec too, and just publicly state, much like I think Alec had discussed with you from your comments, you said, I really took this document, shared it with our members. There's a lot of our members are interested in this, and got feedback off this. And when you share this, you have to explain it because they're not in the room. They don't really understand. So I really worked off this. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to today do any type of official ranking. And I appreciate the work that PRI and you have done, to kind of speed things along, because I know that we are in time constraints. In some things, obviously, I think we're all in agreement in this room that we need more research. We need a better understanding of what the aquifer is. That needs to be a focus. Some things like that don't cause me any concerns. But if we're going to go down and specifically rank different items that are going to be things that we're going to move forward with or not move forward with, I'll still have to take that back to my members. I've talked to a lot of major manufacturers across the entire aquifer. I'm sure Alec has as well, that are just really involved in this and want to have some input. And I need to discuss with them before I can do any formal ranking.
Okay. With that said, go ahead, Alex.
I have a couple questions about the process and what we're trying to do. Is the purpose to have a number that we can put with each of these 18 things that we pass along, or is the purpose to screen the 18 down to some other subset of that, based on those rankings, and really what is it we're trying to accomplish, so that, again, if I go to my people and ask.
Yeah, we're trying to stream it down even more, and I think it's kind of like whittling on a piece of wood. Each time we get it closer to the finished product. And as you can tell from the last 2 times, there was so much discussion about every item. We're going to be here until 2019 December. And as a result, we said, okay, let's get these all capsulized into these broader statements, that the knowledge that we gain by going through this is, I remember we were talking about how much work they put into it, the PRI, coming up with all those recommendations and then whittling them down. It's very important that we start doing exactly what you guys are saying. Are we gonna whittle this down to 10, 5? To me, I don't think we ought to put an arbitrary number on it. I think we ought to put down what is important to protecting the aquifer and fulfilling the 4 charges that we were given. If that's 10, fine. If it's 15, it's fine. If it's 2, but we need to, and as far as our time constraints, we need to have more meetings. We should do that. We shouldn't get, and I say this with all due respect, we shouldn't get kind of complacent and say, we just need to get done. Let's get a product, put it out there. It ought to be a quality product, that when we look at it, we're proud of what we've done, the efforts we've done, the time we've taken, and the people we've looked at. So with that said, I guess now I need to ask, okay, how do you want to proceed with this? Do we want to take more time to give you guys to scrutinize, some of the things that were on here? Go back to your people. We have a subcommittee, we have a task force meeting on the 17th. Do we want to say, hey, let's spend more time looking at this? Or do we want to take, I wouldn't say a mock vote or get a sense of what people want to do, but I was hoping today that we would have some tallies on where we're headed, what we're thinking, and try not to come to meetings feeling like, okay, I'm getting waylaid, getting handled. Discussion on that. How do we proceed from here then? Charles?
Charles Hostetler, PDC. First of all, my experience in doing rankings like this with varieties of stakeholders indicates that we're not going to end up with 18 things that are all similarly weighted at the end if we were to do this numerically. What's likely to happen is that there's a bunch of things, maybe 3 or 4, that are going to have significantly more weight than almost everything else. So as a general comment in this type of process, I support the idea of using this to get a sense of what the various perspectives of the group have. I don't necessarily support it in terms of being the final outcome, and I understand the previous comments and so on, but I think working through the process is, at least as far as we can go, will help us be more thoughtful as a group about what we can take back to our constituents and discuss. So I found this, I'd like to thank both Jim and Prairie Research. I found this very thought-provoking. For myself, I'd like to go ahead and try and work through the process for people that are comfortable doing that, but recognize that this is not the final outcome or the final result. So that's my 2 cents.
Jim, I've got just a general kind of standing back question. So since it sounds like I'm going to be writing the report once you come up with recommendations, looking back at the statute, we keep saying it, we're boiling it down for the governor and the legislature. So part of the task is to just come up with a plan for protecting the aquifer, which, forgive me if I'm wrong, but you don't necessarily need to go to the governor and the legislature for those aspects. You only need to go there if there's a legislative component. So it seems like there's, I mean, the whole report goes, but there are certain things that you might want legislative action items on. And then there are other recommendations that are just a plan to protect the aquifer, which is really primarily done by the people that live in the mayors and the people that are stakeholders in the aquifer. So I was just asking for a little clarity on that. And then also we have the templates that we're working on, which also have recommendations, which I really thank George for putting that concept together because, you know, I thought it was really useful. So there were recommendations, because I got my homework done. I finished my draft version of my write-up. So those are recommendations as well, which I do see some parallel with things on this. That's good. So I'm just kind of trying to stand back a little bit. Yeah, the whole report's going to the governor and the legislature, and I get the whole concept of if they're going to be taking action, you want to have it very concise, but then there are other things that don't really require action on their part that are recommendations as a plan for protecting the aquifer that are really part of the overall group that live and work and breathe in the aquifer, whatever role they, well, not in the aquifer, but on top of it, they utilize it.
That being said, could we go through the process and maybe identify some of those issues? You say, well, okay, this is a legislative issue. This is exactly what I'm talking about now as a stakeholder or mayor type issue. Do you understand what I'm saying, Claudia?
Hi, Claudia Lenhoff, Champaign County Healthcare Consumers. First of all, thank you for your leadership on this. I appreciate it. And I also agree that I think that we shouldn't have a preset necessarily number of recommendations. Protecting our sole source aquifer is, the aquifer faces risks, you know, from, I mean, it's multifaceted. So I think, you know, we should come up with our recommendations, going through a similar process. I don't know that I'm ready to do it today, but I will take a stab at it if that's what we decide, knowing that this isn't a final product. I also have to leave at 11:15, so that's why I'm saying that too. But I do think that functionally, one of the good things that could come out of trying this methodology is it also familiarizes ourselves or refamiliarizes ourselves with the items, and I don't think there's any harm in that. And the other thing is that I think ultimately for the final report, I do think it would be worthwhile if in the report we could make note of which things require what type of action. Some will be legislative, others, you know, will not, but I think we want to make sure that this report is really usable to multiple stakeholders. I mean, we're all stakeholders in terms of the sole source aquifer, but in terms of like being in a position to take some sort of action, it would be good if we could delineate what, you know, what those are. And I also do like the idea, and Charles also echoed this, but about setting priorities, because some things may require more immediacy, or, you know, this is sort of like if it's your one body, you know, there's a lot of things you can do to get yourself healthy or to be healthy or stay healthy, but there are going to be some things that are really a priority because the threat level is too high. So that's how I think of it. So.
The one thing as a task force too, we all represent different regions, we all represent different interests, and I think when we get this process done, we'll fill in some of the gaps. I know Randy Lockton, that's a good statement, and a good process of filling in the gaps. Some of the things that we're going to have as solutions will create more questions. If we get the HTEM, we're going to have a lot more knowledge, and that knowledge will create more questions. What we need to make sure we do as a task force, I think, is the best we can to fill in as many of those gaps as we can, and knowing full well we're not going to fill them all in, and somewhere in the future there may be another task force. But we're going to do the best we can right now with what we can. I like your statements about, hey, how are we going to categorize some of these solutions? And what you're saying about, it's been very well documented. I get the sense that we're worried about too much management. Be careful about, you know, what we decide we're going to do here, because we have to live with it possibly if we give it to somebody and say, you're the ones that recommended it. Now here's what we're doing to you, and you're going, now you don't like it.
I think we talked about this last time, but I mean, I do think having sort of a majority and minority report as well. I mean, we may agree that something is a threat. We may not necessarily agree the best way to manage that threat. And so being willing to sort of express different viewpoints, I think that's why we have a variety of people on the task force. But for me, emphasizing HTEM above all others, I mean, I think that that's the one thing everybody agrees on. It's something that we really need to push together to try to get funding for. And, you know, if everything else appears, I mean, I just think that's the thing that needs to be the top priority, where they just can't ignore it. And, you know, everything else, I think, has the potential to have so many caveats with it. You know, Claudia may feel one way and Alec may feel, and maybe not you guys individually, but the people that you're representing. And so I want to make sure that, you know, everybody has a chance for their thoughts to be in the report, but that we also focus on the things that we can come together on.
Yeah, Steve, go ahead.
Teresa?
Teresa Barnett, now retired DeWitt County Emergency Manager. Anyway, so I have a question. Jim, you had said that we should pick 8 and get rid of 10, I believe.
Other way around, pick 10, get rid of 8.
Okay, pick 10, get
And
rid of
I wouldn't
8.
say get rid of 8, it's just that we're going to tally it, and there will be 10 that will, the top 10 tallies, and the others will be, you know, somewhat less of a tally.
So that's my question is, I was not able to attend the last meeting, so I wasn't sure how that number was chosen, because as I've looked, I've read all my materials before today, but as I look at it, you know, these all are legitimate items that we've come to. So how did we choose 10? And was that just to make it a workable amount of information? And what happens to those that we perhaps don't make the cut?
Good question, good comment. George?
Yeah, I think what we talked about, had in mind, was if you score, you have 10 scores you can give out. It's sort of like ranking basketball teams. You know, it doesn't mean that those bottom 8 fall out. It just means that you gave a 10, a 9, an 8, and 7 on down to 1, 2 10 things. But if I, you know, gave scores to 10 things, Alex might have added scores for other ones that I didn't do. So that would still get points. So all 18 would have points, unless there's ones that nobody voted for.
So then, really through this process, we're looking for more of a consensus of the group to try to do a focus on a specific number of issues. So it's really, that's kind of the end result. Okay, thank you.
Charles Hostetler, just to make, you pulled exactly the point, Teresa, out that I was trying to make earlier. After having done this in the past, what you're going to find is something like HTEM, if it works out the way that the mayor suggested, there's 25 of us, and it's going to get something around 200 importance points associated with it. Okay? I'm going to just pull out some other recommendation. I'm not going to make it specific, but there are some in here that are relatively bland. That doesn't mean they're not good things to do. That I'm not picking on this particular recommendation in any other thing that it says encourage drought preparation. Okay, that may get 10 points, and the whole thing is to separate the things that get hundreds of points from the things that, yeah, everybody kind of agrees are a good idea, but they're not nearly as important as this handful. So no, I don't think anybody's going to drop out. And again, I wouldn't suggest that we look at this as the final result. I think it's more the process of going through this and seeing, yeah, we're in a place where this committee has a sense, this subcommittee, that HTEM is like really, really important. We're building this consensus. And there's some other things that may be good ideas, but man, do we want to detract from the consensus building that we've done? And, you know, if it only got 10 points out of this process, that doesn't mean it needs to drop out. It just means it's not our main theme. I guess it's sort of my way of viewing it.
Let's not forget Steve, or whoever was going to talk.
Go ahead, George.
Oh.
George.
And I would make one comment to Donovan's point and Alex's point. There isn't any specific legislative recommendations in these. That's the job of the next, going forward. So, yeah, I understand that, but, I mean, there's some funding requests and things like that in here, but there's not specific legislative
Right,
recommendations.
and that actually leads, just a question I have too. If we're going through, we're talking about the importance of this, so I'm just gonna pick on drought preparedness because it's been brought up already. I don't know what direction we're going with that. If I vote for drought preparedness, am I saying municipality should have a plan? Or am I saying we're gonna recommend as a task force, legislation be passed that requires drought? Those are two very different things. And so that's not, the unknown of what I am really ranking, kind of makes me unsure where that's gonna go.
Yeah, and I think that falls into the next step.
Task force as a whole.
Yeah, at least that's my understanding.
Let me just add one thing that kind of balances a little bit on the plan versus the stuff that requires funding and legislation. I always give this lecture to my staff. There's plenty of preventive, protective things that could be done right now without additional research. There's plenty of stuff that could be done right now. So the whole reason why you want to know more about the aquifer is not just for the sake of doing research, it's for the sake of protecting the aquifer. So don't lose sight of other things that could be done right now proactively without that additional knowledge. For example, source water protection plans on all the communities. You could do things right now with that. Don't lose sight of that. So I've given my lecture. I mean, my staff, we do modeling sometimes, and, we're delineating capture zones maybe for a community well, and I always remind them, at least in my role, it's like we do that for a reason. We do it not to just do the science, but at least in our job, we're trying to recommend that protection be done in that zone. So don't lose sight of, there's all kinds of things that could be done right now. Best management practices, education, pollution prevention, expanded setbacks. If you've got the groundwater flow model right now, you could calculate the radius of influence for wells and propose an expanded setback at the local level. So there's all kinds of things that can be done. Now, if you want to develop a regulated recharge area along the Sangamon River where we think it's recharging the aquifer in the future, then yeah, you probably need HTM. Or you want to do something and I'm not saying we don't need HTM, because we do. I'm just saying I recommend a bit of a balance there. Don't lose sight of proactive things that can be done.
Rick, I think that we talked about that. What if we, as a subcommittee, we said HTEM was number one on our priority, or an agency that deals with the things you're talking about, and the legislature comes back and said, no, we're not going to do that. And our recommendation had it as number one. Well, then we've got to have something, plan B, to fall back on with what we're recommending also. And I think that's what you're talking about. Well, if that's not, it's not it. So if we don't have HTM, a lot of the other things you said that we can do to work towards preserving the quality and quantity of water aquifer, you've mentioned. How do we put it in a package?
I'm just saying, on the quality side of things, I don't want you to make those things plan B if you can implement them right now.
Right. Okay. Yes. Claudia?
So, Claudia Lenhoff, Champaign County Healthcare Consumers. So some of that might go into the prioritization, right? Like, somebody could think, you know what, this has a big impact, it's easy to implement, it can be implemented relatively quickly, so therefore I'm going to give it a higher priority. So some of that can be, is that a possibility then?
Yeah, just don't lose sight with the You know, don't bury the details in the process, don't, I mean, improperly abandoned wells or drilling through areas where you have restricted use ordinances in your communities. I think you want to keep a good eye on that right now. I don't think you want to make that a low priority. I think there's plenty of tools that you could use right now that you don't require funding from the legislature, or you can do that at the local level.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things also that we talked about.
Yeah, Steve Turner, Illinois Farm Bureau. Now, one thing, I pulled it up here to look back here on my iPad, and you're talking HTM and that nature. One thing I read early in the last meeting there, and you touched it too, land use. And I don't like to use the word restrictive, but there's restrictions out there probably that are needed, there's no doubt about it. But I just want to make this point. When you look at land use and you look at agriculture, best management practices come into play. That's the type of stuff. And believe me, that's a broad base. I'm not going to bore you with all the agronomy detail with that today, but it's very important. That all has to be there, because I think when we're done and we roll forward with land use, there's going to be a lot of industry beyond this table today that's going to look at that. I hate to say, from the regulation negative side of it, and what are you accomplishing? So I think we got to be careful with that, because if that's interpreted that way, you're going to have a big group of industry and interest out here not look kindly on what we're doing. I wish I had the answer how to roll forward with that. But I think that's, and from agriculture standpoint, that's what I got to look at from the standpoint of we're doing best management practices out here. We're still getting more farmers to do it, making sure we are not bringing restrictions down on that type of producer out here, because if we are, we got big problems ahead. I just wanted to kind of make that comment.
Okay, I understand, and I think one thing we need to also understand is what we're going to ultimately do is come up with a narrative that the legislation gets. They will take that, and they will send it off to their people to scrutinize, and they'll come back with those comments, those concerns about what we're asking here. And that'll be the process. You know, all we can do is try to come up with, some type of, the solutions to how to protect this aquifer. And I think that's where we're trying to head to. And then they're going to look at what we give them and say, give it to their people. They're going to look it over and say, oh, here's the problem we've got. And somebody could say exactly what you're saying. And we just can't see ourselves going along with that recommendation. But there will be things that they will say, yes, let's do this, let's do that. And I don't have that collective wisdom to know how they're going to think.
Yeah, I
Come
just
up with a process and something to put together here.
think one more follow-up here. I think getting back to what we started with here today, when you look at the ranking and everything, I myself today will probably, if it's okay, not turn that in, but we'll get that to you, okay? Because like I said, I've got some preliminary stuff down, but I've heard some things here today I think I need to take back and evaluate with my group and get that back to you, okay? So let's,
So having said that, is there any further discussion on, that we need to have before we maybe even decide if we want to try this process? That's one thing we can do, which I think logistically that'd be interesting. Or do we just want to maybe have discussion about some other issues that are out there and come back and do it for real another time? Yes, Alex?
Yeah, hi. Can we talk a little bit about the substance in here? One of the things that I got back in reviewing the slide presentation that we had previously worked on was questions about the word management. And it's used, I've went through and drawing a circle around it just here and now, you know, that's an issue that transcends both of these things, and a lot of questions were kind of, well, what do you mean when you say you're gonna manage water supply? You know, there's a lot packed into that, and we use it kind of colloquially, you know what I mean? Well, we're doing some stuff to look at it and whatever. But again, as to Donovan's point, that could mean we need to regulate, or it could just mean we need to keep an eye on it and know what's going on. And so, you know, I think that it would behoove us to have kind of the conversation about what is it we intend for some of these uses of some of these words to mean.
Right. Well, I know we took management and changed it to monitor in some of the statements.
Right, and that was something we'd
And that was
done.
something we decided to do, and I think that's important. And I had the same kind of questions a lot of times when you look at the word management. I remember the first time I looked at it, I thought, well, that might just be the logistics of how you put it together. Or does it mean a government regulatory type of thing, which will be a red flag to almost anybody? Because they don't want to lose their freedom to decide on how to be self-determining.
Right.
You
And
start handing that over to somebody else, and now all of a sudden, okay, like I said, you said it was okay to do this.
And there's
Very well taken.
probably, I don't know, 6 or 8 times in these recommendations that the term is used, and it might even be different from recommendation to recommendation, but I think it would probably be worth our while to at least have that understanding. I know if I send this out to my folks to get their prioritization, they'll say, well, I can't even tell you what I think of that because I don't know what it means. And so that will be, I can tell you right now, that will be a major stumbling block to moving forward with this.
Any comments on that?
Yeah, oh no, I
Yeah,
think
no, I think
it's worth
a
our
good
while to
point.
come
I
up
mean,
with a
it's one of
group
those things that we've had.
understanding, yeah.
You know, there are certain key words that we have to come to a crossroads with on understanding, I think, as a subcommittee, that how do we go about maybe rephrasing that?
I mean, it's used a lot in conjunction with planning. We talk about planning and management. And
Can
so-
you pick out one thing, like, give us an example of, so we can,
Sure, the first one I find is on the, well, I printed it, so 1, 2, 3, 5, 6th recommendation talks about empowering a group, providing leadership, administrative structure and process for regional water supply planning and management of the aquifer. And so are we giving a group, you know, the authority to plan for the aquifer, or is planning and management mean, and then you're gonna implement that plan, including potentially regulating use of water? I mean, that's a serious question we need to resolve. Is that what we mean for that?
Charles?
I noticed the same thing when I was going over these, which is one of the reasons why I thought going through the process might help us understand this. There are recommendations on here that I would either think would be priority and good, or I could completely oppose, depending on what that word meant. So I'm in total agreement with that point. I thought that going through this process might help reveal some of those things and solve some of those issues.
George, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Jim Risley, CSD. It'd be very helpful with you as a representative of the PRI to maybe give us a sense of what your thinking was on some of these and how maybe we could readjust the wording that would be acceptable.
Well, yeah, the word management, for example, I mean, that comes out of the water supply planning realm, and that was, of course, a controversial issue within that regional water supply planning group itself, because Illinois water law, as it is, doesn't allow for management. So is that more generic? Is it more, yeah. So I guess, do we want to try and wordsmith these some more? You know, we've tried that some, you know, and I think the feeling was, well, okay, let's take these as they are and try to rank them as they are. Or do you want to rank them and then wordsmith them? You know, either way. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, well, to some degree, I think you gave me an idea at the very end of your statement there, but basically you're thinking when you put it together, do you really see this as kind of a management tool where we're going to have government in control of certain entities that a lot of people are saying, we can't agree to that. But
I personally don't like the word, so I'm happy to strike it out of it, so.
Good.
but-
Or else use a different word to use, like the word monitor, where it would apply. I like the idea of maybe going through the process. And then everybody saying, okay, now, I would agree to this if this is what you mean by management. But if not, we got to look at it again.
And I have a different, so we're talking about, that discussion is about quantity issues and protection. So right now, in terms of how conflicts are resolved, there's a common law doctrine called the rule of reasonable use. So there's no constitutional authority to any agency to give out permits, which I think there are a lot of people, or that, that's getting into water use. Right now, conflicts are resolved before a judge, two different parties. You got a private well user and an industry, and that judge makes a decision on whether it's a wasteful or malicious use. So that's the whole quantity issue as it stands right now. For quality, there's a whole body of not only statutory but regulatory tools that we've talked about. And when I use the word, when a community has a management plan, say to protect their delineated wellhead protection area, I look at that word as a spectrum. On one end is the least stringent, which can help protect, to the most stringent. On this end of the spectrum, you got education, pollution prevention, road signs, best management practices, and then you kind of get in the middle with technology controls, which isn't a prohibition. It's trying to look at controls to make the two uses coexist, all the way, or even inspections, all the way up to prohibitions. Prohibitions you have to be very careful with, because if you restrict all uses under the law, it can be a takings. And whoever's doing that would have to reimburse, a government if they restricted all uses of a piece of property, then that could be considered a taking. So for quality, there's a spectrum of things, from voluntary management to sort of in the middle, technology controls, to prohibitions. All are useful. For quality, there isn't that, or quantity, there is not that same level of, it's common law, conflicts are between a use, and so, yeah, you would have to develop legislation to authorize regulations, which has been very divisive. I'm not saying, it is, in northern Illinois, for example, there are areas where the aquifers are actually being dewatered. And there's some industrial uses. They have fixed pieces of property. They don't have anywhere to go to look for more water. So, it's just a very thorny issue and has totally different, the evolution of what's there for quality is totally different than what's there for quality relative to those terms, management. That's just my perspective.
Teresa Barnett, I'm just going to say DeWitt County EMA. So my question is, and going back to, let's look at, I had it as number 7, I think you had it as number 6. As far as empowering a group to provide leadership, administrative structure, water supply planning, management of the Mahomet Aquifer. Okay, so there currently exists at some level in this management or monitoring idea, and I'm not sure the exact title, but I know for DeWitt County, and we have a representative, and I know there's one from Piatt County, and I think there might be a third one. And I believe it's something like the Mahomet Aquifer Planning Commission, something like that. And
Mahomet Valley Water Authority.
thank you, Mahomet Valley, thank you very much. So I know that we have on a local basis, and I assume, George, do those groups occur across the aquifer area?
Some of the aquifers.
Okay,
Not
so for DeWitt County, and I know Piatt County has that. And I know that those groups did play, at least our DeWitt County representatives did play a very big role in fighting for the declaration as a sole source aquifer a few years back. So, and when we look at that spectrum that Rick is talking about, how do those local groups play into this? And I don't know exactly what their full authority is, but I do know that there is a localized level of monitoring, planning. Somebody's paying attention to what's going on with our aquifer. So maybe you guys can shed some light on those groups that are already in place that I don't think we want to restrict from what they're doing already.
That is the one exception to what I said, are those water authorities. And on paper, I believe they do have, it appears that they have the authority to restrict. I mean, I don't think for the lawyers in the room that's ever been litigated. So I'll leave that right where it is.
I guess I would suggest maybe revising some of these possibly and voting on them later. Or I think looking at these, to me, the first 6 are the most important, and I don't think there's anything. Rick added some comments on number 6, which in my humble opinion is kind of the heart of the committee, and it's probably the most important one. And then I think some of the problems that Alex may have and maybe Donovan have fall in some of the ones after that, which I think maybe we can have a little discussion here and strike through some of those ones, more controversial points. No?
I'm not willing to concede that the first things on the first page are going to emerge as the sense of the most important thing. That's the whole purpose of going through the process. So if you're going to preordain the result, and then I can't work with that, okay? So
Right, okay.
I was sort of leaning towards your first thing, George, where you said, let's find out if there's 200 importance points associated with, if we really think there's 200, however many associated with HTEM, and there's only 10 associated with encouraged drought preparedness, and total example. And then if we have to wordsmith or say, well, I could be for this or I could not be, that will emerge during this process, right? So,
No, I like your idea.
I'm just
Yeah.
want it on record. I'm not willing to concede that the first 6 things are going to emerge
All
as
right, all
the
right.
most important things from the sense of this committee.
At least on my list. Yeah.
Yes.
Diane Marlin, Urbana. Sorry for coming in late. I read the instructions that you gave us, read through all these things, and then chose not to follow your instructions. But, but as I read through this, all of these 18 points, to me, fall into 4 categories. It's characterization of the aquifer, mapping it to understand it. It's water quality, it's water quantity, and then it's communication. So we've got 4 categories here. So then I went back, and under each of those 4 categories, I pulled out what to me was the most important message and function in each of those 4 categories, and using the 18 things here and combined them. So I'm just going to pass this around just so I can share what I came up with, and you can use it for what you want. But that's how I approach this. And really, I think it falls down to these 4 categories.
There are.
We need to
5
simplify.
categories?
Uh,
Oops, sorry.
There are?
I know you came with 5, but there are
Yeah.
5 different categories that all of the 18 recommendations came out of, but we chose to
Yeah.
eliminate those categories and put them all in there based on
Right.
their merit.
Right.
But what you did is exactly kind of what was done previously, too.
Well, I think it's
Categorizing
logical.
those.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
really
it is
logical. And to report it, it has to be done. So under those, we should stick to those.
Now, just let me ask you, could you then,
Yes.
from your recommendations and how you've ranked them, could you feel that you'd feel comfortable putting together a top 10 to 1 list so we can start getting a sense of where we're thinking?
Right. Actually, I have 4.
Okay.
Pass that around.
I was just going to suggest that maybe we kind of go through and vote on some of these. We've talked about process, I just don't think there's going to be consensus. And I think that not on process, probably consensus on process, but not necessarily on the items. And I think that that's okay. We come from divergent groups with different reasons that we're at the table. And so I think people just express whatever their concerns or their support is. We record that and we get a sense of it. I think our struggle is that we'd like to have consensus, and I don't think we're going to have consensus.
And you said on the outcome, right?
Right, I mean, I think we
Not on the
just go
process,
through
on the
and, right. I mean, I think process is okay. I think Jim's done a great job of trying to focus us. But the reality is that we're going to disagree about the result,
There's going to
right?
be a range of, yes.
Right.
A wide
I would
range of
agree.
views, yeah.
You know, I'm with, sorry, Jim Risley. I'm with Charles on this. What I have found in this process, you'll find a lot of agreement at the top and a lot of agreement on the bottom. And where it gets kind of, where you have the conflict is right in the middle, about the last 5 and 6 in the middle where there'll be some discussion.
Well, let's just go through
But
them.
having said that, how about if we did this? Why don't we just do the vote as the
That's fine.
process is right now? And come up with where we would be, even if it's a hypothetical, at least get the process going, get a sense, get that 200 possibly, and then have discussion after that.
So do we
Okay.
want to put the ranking recommendations, do we want to give those to Joe so he can?
Can we give those to you, Barb, to tally?
Do we
Or
want
Joe,
to see
yeah.
them up on the?
I think you want to be able to have the
Okay.
public see them.
Pardon me?
I think you want the public to be able to see.
Right, so Barbara, they part of what's on,
Put 'em on the,
Are
okay.
are those recommendations, the 18, they should be in that, correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
Or in this?
yes.
It's on the, it's what you sent, how was
So
that
we
sent
don't
to
have
us?
it electronically. is
You don't
what
have
we're
it
at.
electronically?
well,
No.
I've got it up, so
It was
do you
on,
have a thumb drive? I
There's a
can
piece
Trish
of paper
Baker.
right
Yeah, we do have a thumb drive.
yeah, we
Well,
got paper here if you want to put it on here.
Why can't we call
We
on
could.
each of the committees? and
Just
those-
save it
or
to
each
thumb
of the
drive, yeah.
members, and those that are willing to go up and write their thing down there, we can do that. Good.
Is that
Charles,
okay?
the only add-on to that is the public can't see what you're doing on that. But they could if you did it up on the
Yeah, I
screen.
think we have it
That's
up
cool.
there.
Well, it was
Yeah,
emailed to
Barb,
the
go ahead.
We're just going, I have a thumb drive. Joe's going to remove it, give it to Deb on her computer, save it to that, and we'll bring it right back up.
Okay. Does anybody need a ballot?
Thank you.
Okay, I've got them here. If you need a ballot,
use one too, because I couldn't do it on my iPad.
okay.
Is that what this?
If you need a ballot, just let me know. This sheet right here is all this on this side? And this is the. I got that on my, yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
Were you handing out blank ballots?
Yeah,
I'll take a blank ballot, because I want to record what the vote.
there you go.
No, 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 no. I meant,
Are you talking about this one?
yeah.
Yeah, you can have that. You need this? Okay.
Is this what you're calling the ballot?
This is, sorry, this right here is all his recommendations here.
This file,
This
save as, this is the save file there.
Is all of these right here. So if you were gonna rank this one to 10, just say this one.
There. Pull it up.
Then you'll put your number down here. Yes.
If I could add one thing, Mr. George, I think we would like to view this as, okay, you're ranking these existing things that are out there, and then, and then passing those forward, but that doesn't necessarily mean these words or these priorities are that of the full committees and stuff, so that, then it's a process to change. But right now, if we tie it to these existing words that have already come in from the past, then, we're ranking those, and then we can change them from there.
Very good. Okay. We have on the screen now, the ballot, what you see on the screen right here is this here. You're gonna have to go through every one of them right through here. Yes.
If you click on the other tab, we have everyone's, and he can tally that right there for everyone to see, and then we have a electronic version of the tallies. I think would be quite beneficial.
Okay, well, let's do this. I have Larry Stoner's votes. Right. Do you want me to tell you what his vote was and see how this process works? Yes. Okay, yes.
Joe will just put the tallies in electronically.
Yeah. Now,
As we go
some of
through
you
them.
might feel a little trepidation on saying, hey, I don't know if I want to put myself out there right now. If you want to, but it'd be good to keep going. Try. At least try to get a sense of where you're at and knowing full well you come back with something different later on. Because I'd like to get as many votes as we possibly can on this. Okay? Yes.
Before we get started, again, there are certainly some things I want to be cooperative on and move forward on. I want to support, HTM and everything else and prepared to give good for that. I don't know if I can vote on everything today, it's just as a caveat. Second thing, how many voting members are there here today, and what is the highest score that could possibly be?
Raise your hand if you're a voting member. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we have 120.
So 120 is
Oh, yeah, 13. Actually, 14. I've got Andy Renz and Larry's here, looking for Andrews. And you counted yourself? Yes. Thank you. I forget myself, yeah, 10 times. Okay, so let's do the process then and see how this goes. And I think the best way to do this maybe is you do it every way you want, but aquifer characterization, better define the extent of the Muhammad Aquifer, that's number 1. And we just go through it that way, 1 through 18. Larry Stoner has number 1 as a 10. Can you put that in, okay?
He put it in the wrong box.
Yeah, just click right, yeah, there you go. He just gets 10, yeah, perfect.
Number 3, he has a 5. Number 4 has a 3. Number 6.
Hang on, slow down.
Okay, sorry. I'm gonna look at this, you tell me when to. Okay, ready? Number 6, he has a 7.
What? I think we're still on 3.
Okay. Number 6 is improved protection of water quality by reviewing monitoring plans and data landfills. That one should be a 7. That one right there should be a 7. This is blank.
So number one comes up as blank on our sheet. Oh, there you go. Because it's a line, but we're off by 1.
There's a blank. Let's restart.
No.
All horses back to the starting gates.
All right, that's correct. Oh, okay, I see over there. I'm sorry. I never even saw this over there. Yeah, okay, this one right here, number 3 is a 10. Yeah, you find it just a way of doing this better than I'm doing it, let me know. But I got to feel this is gonna take a while. Okay. So everybody start saying where they rank in my row?
Yeah, if you went
How's
like
that
each
work?
item and we each said where we are on it. it
Sounds
might-
good. Let's start with this one right here, then number 3. George? 8? Gotta get mine.
With number 1 being the most important.
No, 10. 10's the most.
Because I was,
Nine? Sorry, folks. Okay, 10. Claudia?
I'm sorry, I'm going to pass on the rankings right now, but I will do it.
Donovan? Make a stab at it?
In the understanding that I'm reading this as, this is basically, we support HTEM and funding HTEM. That's how I'm reading this. That's how I'm taking this as today. I'm not reading this as a legislative recommendation at this point, so I'm not really sure what the recommendation is. But if this is, do we support HTEM, then 10.
All right, that's how I read it too. Steve? Charles?
8.
Lynn? Andrew? I don't know, 5 years. Alex?
I'm gonna pass also.
Okay, Teresa?
10.
Ned Chapin?
Nope, step. So,
Okay,
10.
10? Charles?
There's Rufus.
Diane?
10.
10.
10? Okay. Nope.
Did he do his, oh,
Do you want total now or wait to total? I don't want to predetermine anything in head. Why don't we wait to total? Toward the end? Okay. Right, okay, let's go back then to, number 4 on your sheet, or 4 here. Right here, okay.
For the other.
0. Oh, this is Larry's. I'm sorry, mine? Seven. Larry, 0. Now, Claudia, are you gonna stay in all these?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Donovan?
Yeah, outside of just giving my blanket support for HGM, now we're getting into things like F in this one, improving estimates of water use, monthly variations. I don't know what that means, so I'll probably abstain from here on out.
Okay. And Charles?
9.
Is it?
I'm sorry. 8.
Diane?
Pass on it.
8.
That's it, oh, it tallies it for us. Okay, all right. Aquifer characterization, and this one there? Where you at? This one? Okay, number 5? Six? So we got 6.
Number 6.
Number 6, right there.
No, no, no.
Right
It
here.
gets number 6 in that
Yeah,
spot.
right there.
Sorry, that's.
Okay. Four. 5. I'll tell you what, if you see your name coming up, you just want to say the number instead of me having to call your name off all the time. Bob, you know, yeah.
I apologize because I'm going to have to leave, but I will do this and submit it to you, and then you can just add it to this table, right? That way we can, okay, thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you.
10.
got my top 10 on the list I put together, so I gotta, as I go through there. I might have to do that.
So if we're passing, is that the same as a zero?
No, I wouldn't put that in there.
Okay,
Not a pass.
then I would say zero.
Would you mind helping me with calling out the names or who's up, so I can? Yeah. Okay, so right now it'd be Diane Marlin, she's gonna pass? Pass?
Which one?
This one right here?
That's a zero.
Zero, okay, zero, and then you'll go to the next one.
Pass.
Zero.
Would it be helpful if I read the names and read the prompt and hid the folks who weren't here so we don't have to see them?
Yep. I believe so. Okay, come back to me. Here, zero. Okay, down here then.
Oh, one moment.
Sorry.
So now it's, I'll hide the totals as well, so we're not seeing them.
You're good.
And, okay. All right. So under water quality and protection, improve protection of water quality by, we are on number 8. Mr. Roadcamp? Okay. Mr. Risley?
8,
Mr. Stoner?
7,
Mr. Griffith? Mr. Hostetler?
2,
Ms. Barnett?
9,
Mayor Finan? Mayor Marlin?
9, but I like Rick Cobb's version of it. So can we make a note of that?
yeah, I think that's important. Rick, you did, and I've got that copy here too, if you need to see what Rick's recommendations were there in red.
that may
Anybody
not
need to
tally
see
right
that?
now.
What's that?
That may not tally right now.
Correct.
I'm just having the group be advised.
Yeah, just make a note that there's 2 more additions that Rick put on there. I got a copy of that too, if anybody needs to see that.
I'm a 7.
And Mr. Zimmerman? Okay. Water quantity and sustainability, empower a group to provide leadership, administrative structure, and processes for regional water supply planning and management of the Mahomet Aquifer. Mr. Roadcap? 0. Risley?
10,
Stoner?
6,
Griffith?
I'm passing it on.
Okay. Hostetler?
I'm going to have to pass on this one just because I could, depending on what it means, I could either strongly support it or strongly oppose it. It depends on how it's funded and what authority it has. So I just did not know what to do with this.
Okay. Barnett?
pass, and ditto to what Charles said.
Okay, finance passed. Marlin?
8,
Mayor Wolf?
9.
Mr. Zimmerman?
And I did 0 also based on some of the safety services.
you want to leave that as a 0 then, or just a blank?
I'll leave it as 0 for right now.
Okay. Charles, how about you? Do you want to, based on what you said, you could strongly, or do you want to leave it blank? As opposed to a 0?
I wanted
Until we get
to
more
record
defined.
that I did not vote.
Okay, then that would be a blank.
Yes.
Do you want to leave yours as blank based on that rationale?
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, yeah. If you feel strongly that this is not something you want involved at all, say a 0, but if you're not sure, you might want to come back, we'll just leave it blank.
Water quantity and sustainability. Ensure comprehensive water use reporting and data assessment with additional emphasis on irrigation, consistently and fully fund the Illinois Water Inventory Program. Roadcap? Sorry, I didn't catch that. Thank you. Risley? It, yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Go to Stoner and put a 2.
Okay, Griffith is a pass. Hostetler?
0.
Barnett?
I'm trying to figure out which one that we're voting on. It is number 8, thank you. That would be a number 4 for me.
Finan is a pass. Marlin? 7. Wolf? Zimmerman?
Mine?
I-
0.
I believe we're on number 9 on your sheets. Water quality and sustainability. Identify key indicators relevant to water supply planning and management. For example, population, the economy, the environment, etc., and assess their implications for sustainable water supplies. Roadcap? 0. Risley? Stoner? Okay. Griffith is a pass. Hostetler?
0.
Barnett?
7.
Finan is a pass. Marlin?
Pass.
Wolf?
Pass.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, 2.
Okay. Number 10, water quantity and sustainability. Develop local, independently reviewed water supply management plans to be in compliance with guidelines contained in a regional plan. Roadcap?
0.
Stoner? Griffith is a pass. Hostetler?
4.
Barnett?
0.
Finan is a pass. Marlin?
0.
Wolf?
Pass.
Zimmerman? Okay. Scrolling down. Water quantity and sustainability. Use the established regional water supply planning process to review and update regional and local water supply plans at least every 5 years. Roadcap? Risley? Stoner? Griffith? Hostetler?
3.
Barnett?
5.
Finan is a pass. Marlin?
Pass.
Wolf?
Pass.
Zimmerman? Number 12, water quantity and sustainability. Encourage drought preparedness. Roadcap? 0. Risley?
0.
Stoner?
1.
Griffith is a pass. Hostetler?
0.
Barnett?
0.
Finan is a pass. Marlin?
Pass.
Wolf?
Pass.
Zimmerman?
Sorry. Come back to this. 0.
Okay.
Jim, can I interrupt real quick?
We'll just go through the process.
Right. I know you're only going through people who are voting. You know, I gave the first one 10 because I just want to show compromise and supporting HTM and stuff like that. But because I think that's going to skew the end results, I'm voting for one and none of the others. If we can go ahead and remove my 10 from the very first one and go ahead and just remove me from the list of voting on any of these, I'd probably be most fair so that the first one's not overly skewed from the other ones. Thank you.
Number 13 on your list, water quantity and sustainability. Design, construct, and operate water supply facilities in a manner that prevents unacceptable impacts to surface waters, wetlands, and aquatic and riparian ecosystems. Roadcap. Risley. Stoner was a 1. Hostetler.
0.
Barnett. 1. Finan is a pass. Marlin. Pass. Moore Wolf. And Zimmerman. Number 14, water quantity and sustainability. Promote water conservation measures, including expanded use of gray water, smart lawn watering, reducing leaks in distribution systems, etc. Roadcap? Stoner?
0.
Barnett? 0. Finan is a pass. Marlin? Number 15, water quantity and sustainability. Assess the impact of new high-capacity wells on other users of the aquifer. Roadcamp? 1. Risley? 1. Stoner? 0. Hostetler? 0.
0, correct.
Barnett?
I have 6.
Finan? Pass. Marlin? Wolf? Zimmerman? Communication. Improve education and outreach so that all stakeholders are better informed about water resources, water demand, and water supply planning and management, particularly when plans are made, reviewed, and updated. Roadcamp. 3. Risley. 3. Stoner. 9. Hostetler.
5.
Barnett.
0.
Finan is a pass. Marlin. Pass. Wolf. Pass. And Zimmerman. Communication. Plan cooperative research and data collection, analysis management, and exchange by academic institutions, units of government, the private sector, and other stakeholders. Roadcamp? 0. Risley? 5. Stoner?
0.
Hostetler?
7.
Barnett?
2.
Finan is a pass. Marlin?
6.
And Zimmerman. And lastly, communication. Provide education to private water and gas well owners on existing laws and potential sealing procedures. Roadcamp?
0.
Risley, 0. Stoner?
0.
Hostetler?
6.
Barnett?
0.
Finan is a pass. Marlin?
Pass.
Wolf? And 0. That totals out.
I'll tell you what, can I put Andrews in here now? Yeah. Okay, I didn't have it as on this, and, okay, sorry. Okay. Right here. Let's go right down, he gave 10, then 9, 8, 0, 2, 7,
guess I have a question. When this is all done, this will be posted to the page then, or what's the, or I guess, or what?
Now, what I'll do is, once I get everyone's tallies,
Right, that's,
I'll email the final.
yeah, that's what I mean,
Yeah,
something like that.
right.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I wanted
Can you email what we have today? Because I
I
need to
sh-
finish ranking.
I sure can.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to put a deadline for the voting? I mean, it should be wrapped up before the next full committee meeting, I would.
I just, yeah, let me-
Well, how about I ask, when do you think you could do your tallies? On those who passed?
the latest date being the 17th, if not earlier. Yeah, I'd like to do it before that, too.
So can you expand that so we can see all the numbers that came out today?
Can you just read them going, start at the top? Just read them going down, so I can jot them down on a piece
Yeah.
of paper
Yeah,
and see
that's
them?
what I'm trying to do too.
Like 95, 68, 40,
Yeah.
30, 7, 50, 33, 23, 18, 4, 25, 0, 9, 1, 17, 21, 27, and 6 is the last one. Thank you. So I'm glad I didn't stipulate that the first 7 were going to get the most votes.
He's pounding on you.
One correction, when you remove the note on Mayor Marlin's vote, that 50 does become a 59. It totals correctly.
Which one's that?
Water quality and protection improved
Protection of water quality by
by,
ABC?
colon, with the Rick Cobb
Yes,
thing. It becomes 59.
okay.
I shouldn't have any trouble compiling them, just, it's pretty quickly, yes. If I could probably, if everyone gets that to me by the 12th, I will compile them and be able to turn that around probably the next day.
That would be good to get it before
Right.
we come together.
People that passed, right? Correct.
On our agenda, it says future subcommittee meetings and venues. Are we ready for that? Or are we still want to stay with number 2 a little bit longer?
I'm not done with 2 yet.
Okay, good.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Charles Hostetler. So, thank you, PRI, and thank you, Jim, for putting this together. And I found it thought-provoking. And sort of what I plan to do now is write up what I was thinking when I assigned those numbers and send those to Barb. Because I think the thought behind it and sharing that is as important as the outcome itself. So I personally pledge to build on this process by sharing that with the group. The question I have specifically is, and I want to remind ourselves, is we voted on this list as it was prepared, and that's what we agreed to do. And it was not a binding vote, and it's not final, and it's a work in process. Okay, I would like for the group to consider as you go forward that these are PRI recommendations, and they don't deal with at least one threat we have found to the aquifer, and that is man love number 4. So I have heard public testimony, I've heard expert testimony, and the group has been presented with documentation of that. And so my feeling is I think there could be 2 additional actions that we could put on this list. One would actually deal with aquifer remediation, sort of fix the threat that exists and get people off bottled water to the best of our ability. But that's not the right wording, but it's the sense of what I'm suggesting. And the second is more, how do we keep this from happening again? Now, these may be in litigation, they may be, can this group develop recommendations along the lines of fixing people who are actually at harm because they are on bottled water? And B, keeping something like this from happening again by increased inspections, whatever the right remedy is. So, thank you for your attention.
Jim Risley, CSD. Commenting on your comment, Charles, I do know there's legislation that's just been passed, 4746, that talks about new regulations and new monitorings that are being enacted. The reason probably we didn't put a lot of things on there is we don't know for sure where the litigation's going. And I think a lot of things that you were just talking about is going to be covered in litigation that's going right now.
Our record to support that we have.
Yes, and I think that's important what he just said, and that, then my comment to that, because if litigation doesn't reach the impact that we feel that it should have, well, then how do we retract and make that recommendation to legislation? Thank you. Appreciate that. Now, having said that, just another comment, and I brought this up earlier, and Andrew Wren commented on this today on an email to me. He had I had contact with Mike Mankowski, the director of the Illinois DNR, I think, and in our meeting at Mahomet, he was talking about needing more, lack of a better term maybe, punitive damages that we could impose, or someone could impose, their agency could impose upon, using the example, People's Gas is at $50,000 fine and $1,000 a day. They are in, I think, some type of, how would I term it, Rick? We were talking about legislation or talking about a Senate bill to give them more of a punitive responsibility or monetary responsibility as far as a fine. And I don't know how we as a task force could support that recommendation to legislation or not. But I did say I would bring that point up here during this meeting. So it's on record. You know what? He said Senate Bill 2706, but when I looked it up, it was completely. That was Senate bill on the Aquifer Task Force and the People's Gas issues. That has passed. It was signed 2 weeks ago. And there's been other litigation that's been taking place. It's kind of an ongoing process as I see it, but there's not a lot of verbiage out there, so it's hard to deal with. And also, and this is it, Chris Storr, he has some recommendations on landfill issues, and I told him I would make a copy of this recommendation. It's on the, I believe, is it on the task force website?
I'm not sure if his first, he's done a couple
Yeah,
of
he's done
them.
a couple. I think this is just.
The one that was a formal public comment, just him,
Yeah.
I did email the entire group so that everyone would have it in consideration. And that's when I brought up wanting to ask, should we create a section on the webpage for public comments and just call it that, public comments, because we've received, I think, 3 now of substantial comments. And I can work with our agency to do that.
I think that'd be a good idea. You know, the PDC, technical service comment, his comment, Chris O's, and
Then I think
the recommendations
there was a
it's already
group
there.
comment letter that came out as well.
5 signatories on that letter, right?
was that last meeting? Yes. That was the last meeting.
It was
Okay, so you've got that one. This one,
Chris Storr,
Chris Storr, I'm going to bring this around, make sure.
and the third one was assigned by a group of 5.
Carter, Hammond, Hooker, Marlin, and Stork.
Right.
And who were they representing?
They were representing themselves. They weren't under,
Okay.
there was no group or no letterhead.
say group of 5.
Group of 5.
You got that? Yeah, I got that. Okay, yeah, so it is on there.
Everyone has it.
Yeah. With the potential to get it. All right, with that said, any other comments by the public or the task subcommittee? Okay, future meetings and venues?
The next task force as a whole is the 17th. Are we doing all the subcommittees just like we've been doing the last couple months?
That was my question. If Subcommittee B,
Prior to, we could do that. It's already set up in Springfield at Committee Room 212 on the 17th. And we could do 9:30 if you think it'll only be an hour, 10:30 for Subcommittee A, and 11:30 for full task force. That is up for discussion.
I support that.
Charles, do you think we'll need a full hour for subcommittee A?
No, for Subcommittee A, maybe a
But-
half hour will be, so I hope to have all the drafts now. I've got my first draft from Rick. I'm cracking the whip on George. I have, what I hope we can do is have the thing there and say, is,
$212. I believe in the email, I switched the number and said 221. That's apparently because I was dyslexic that day. But it's 212. Committee room 212. It's at the Capitol.
Oh, it's in the Capitol building?
Mhm.
And what about parking? Like, is there a specific parking area for us?
I will find that out. Okay. Right.
There's paid street parking, or if you're going to plan on being there for a while, if you actually go to the visitor center, not the Capitol, that's all free parking. You can also type in Boone Saloon, which shares the parking lot.
I was going to add that as well. Yeah, it's the parking right by Boone Saloon.
Boone's Saloon. Okay.
Okay. That'll be fine. Okay,
So can we review the times?
let's, I agree.
Subcommittee A would like half an hour, please.
Okay, how long do you think for B?
I
If,
think B, we gotta get as much time as we can. If we get done early, great, but otherwise, hour and a half. If we start at 9,
okay, not, I was going to say 9 or 9:30. It's up to, it's not, we started at 9 before.
I'd rather go
may I-
early and have extra time
yeah,
than
I
go
would
late
too,
and
but
run
not
out.
have enough.
If I can make a recommendation, since we have to make these public times to start the meetings, if we
Yes.
do subcommittee A first and give a half hour, everyone that's in these subcommittees is going to be the same people generally who are going to be in the full meetings. That way, we have as much time between when B starts to when the actual meeting starts. There won't be any
Okay.
delays.
I have no problem with that. So Subcommittee A at 9. And Subcommittee B will be at 9:30 and run till the full task force meeting at 11:30. Yeah, we won't be able to start the full task force until 11:30. Not if it's listed per Open Meetings Act, it has to start, we can't start, I can put it as 11. If you only think, if you think an hour and a half is plenty, I can certainly move the task force up to 11.
If everybody comes
It's just Donovan is thinking if there's a lot to discuss, there's a lot to discuss.
Well, my part is if we do B second and it runs over into our full task force meeting, I think that would be okay because we can then go into the full task force and continue work.
11? 11?
So we want to start subcommittee A at 9 still?
Yes.
Okay. A at 9:30 to 11?
Okay.
Task force meeting then starts at 11:30.
Nope. 11. Okay, the next thing is, I would like Charles, just to get your agenda items to me as quick as possible, and I can get everything posted quickly. And I'll work with Jim and Larry as far as, I think I have an idea, of course, what we're going to be doing. And then Deb, I'll email Deb with the full task force agenda as well. I like it.
And all meetings will be in room 212.
Not that you wouldn't, but make sure you have a photo ID to get into the Capitol.
Thank you, Joe.